Hello everyone, welcome to the Jacksonville History Show. I'm Harry Reagan. Later we'll find out what's going on at the Ritz Theater and Museum. But first, the history of newspapers in Jacksonville. And our guests are Frank Denton, editor of the Florida Times-Union, and Matt Soergel, TU reporter. Welcome.
Thank you.
Harry.
Glad to have you on the Jacksonville History Show.
Thanks, Harry.
And Matt, I got this idea reading a story that recently ran in the Times-Union on the history of the Times-Union. It goes back a little bit before the Times-Union, of course. There were two papers, and that's one of the things I guess we can talk about is there used to be a lot of competition in the newspaper business. Not so much anymore, Frank.
Well, but that's true in every city. There are very few cities where there's more than one daily newspaper anymore.
And there were morning papers and, hard to believe, afternoon papers.
Well, and actually for decades, afternoon papers were stronger.
Yeah.
So they were the ones that had the largest circulation because people wanted to read the news. When they got home, they'd go to work early in the factory or wherever they worked, and then they'd want to go home and read the paper in the evening.
And what happened? Was that logistics, the challenge of getting the papers delivered in the afternoon rush hour?
Well, I suspect that might have been a factor, but it's actually easier to get the paper delivered probably in the morning by carriers before they go to school or to work than it is in the afternoon. But what happened was television, which people would get home from work and instead of wanting to settle down with a newspaper, wanted to settle down in front of the TV set. So we were able to give them overnight news first thing in the morning.
And we had the Jacksonville Journal here up until 1988.
Yeah. And not only another newspaper, but another ownership. And then the Times-Union acquired the Journal.
Indeed. And then they had separate staffs, and then for the last few years, the same staff wrote for each paper.
Yeah.
Which is
It was the same place in the city I grew up in West Texas. Was same company owned two newspapers, morning and afternoon, and it was pretty much the same stories. They might have been changed a little bit for the afternoon, and strangely enough, my family subscribed to both papers, so we got them in the morning and in the afternoon. So after World War II, newspaper penetration, the percentage of homes that got a daily newspaper, was actually about 105%, meaning that there was 105 newspapers delivered for every 100 homes. And some homes didn't get it because the people were illiterate or couldn't afford it, so many homes got more than one.
Yeah.
And technology is a big part of this story. We talk about the history of newspapers and how it's changed.
Well, the Union itself started in 1864. You can see where the name came from in Jacksonville, which was taken, sort of. You know more about that than me, but it was kind of a hotbed for Civil War action in Florida.
It was occupied, right?
Occupied several times.
And I guess we'd have to say, in all fairness, that their account of the Civil War might not have been totally unbiased.
Exactly. It was started in 1864 and operated on a hand-controlled press, and it mostly...
And it was weekly, I guess.
Yeah, and it reported news however it could get it. So people coming off steamships, they reported rumors. They got maybe a paper from Philadelphia that was a couple weeks old, and then they would tell the people in Jacksonville. So it was a very crude sort of way, but it was still a necessary way, some sort of link to what is happening out there. Can you imagine being in 1864 Jacksonville trying to follow the news of the Civil War? It'd be very difficult even for a newspaper
And
operation.
I saw someone recently on Antiques Roadshow with an old paper reporting Lincoln's assassination, and there was such a long delay before it actually made the paper because news didn't travel so fast.
Well, you remember the Battle of New Orleans was fought two weeks after the war was over because they didn't know.
Yeah. Well, so there was a lot of competition. I think we can say there was a little more virulent partisanship on the part of how papers wrote the news. All of that's changed, and we're happy about most of that.
Yeah. Back then, they were very highly partisan. Though I think they were actually very much civic, many of them anyway. And I believe the Union and the Times-Union later were very much civic-minded, civic promoters. And when you look through the old microfilm, you'll see a lot of stuff about reporting from Jacksonville, the greatest city in the South, you know, that kind of stuff, you know, which was part of their job, I think,
Sure.
for this small town that was, you know, muddy streets and wooden boardwalks and stuff.
And anyone who's interested in history, anyone who's doing a research paper or something on history, one of the sources you've got to go to is the newspaper.
Yeah, absolutely. I collect old newspapers, or used to. I still have them, not so actively, and I actually have one newspaper from the 18th century that I picked up in an antique shop somewhere. And I have the New York Times that was printed on the day that I was born. And I think I have another one too, another newspaper the day I was born. It's fascinating to go through it and look at how life was lived there. And you can tell in a newspaper, if you read it from cover to cover, even today, it gives you many insights, not only in the politics and news of the day, but in lifestyle, particularly in advertisements for what people bought and what they cost.
Yeah.
Classified advertising. There's
It's not
much
just the
of it
news,
anymore.
it's the ads that
Right.
are interesting.
Yeah, very often.
Yeah. So if we looked at, if we were looking at the history of Jacksonville, and we looked at old newspapers, Jacksonville's newspapers, all of it would be there. I mean, you would have the Great Fire and the yellow fever epidemic and consolidation and so forth.
Yeah, we had reporters dying at their desks, is this how the story goes. They stayed and reported
During the yellow
news
fever epidemic?
during the yellow fever epidemic, and the editor ended up dying during the epidemic. Stayed there, and they had people on the outside, but it was very hard to get news at that point too. But I think you're right. Looking at the paper, you know, the old papers is really fascinating. Like during, for my research on this 50 years of the Times-Union, found around D-Day, there are photos, ads of a young woman walking down the street and the sailors whistling at her, and she's feeling pretty because she's re-dyed her dress with this material, with this, I guess, some concoction that made it bright red again.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff you see.
And for some reason, this source of information is called the morgue, still called the morgue, I guess. How available is that to some student or someone doing research?
Well, it's I don't think we call it the morgue anymore. It's the archives or
Yeah.
the library. Some of us still remember when it was
like the
called the morgue. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Ours is not open to the public, except on special requests, just for logistical reasons. The public library, as you know, has a microfilm of the newspaper.
So that's
going
your
back.
best place to go.
Yeah, for the public
Yeah.
would be to go there, and then if there were a scholar or someone doing specialized research, we'd try to help them if we could.
So let's talk a little bit about how the evolution of the way news is presented to people. It's not just getting that paper off of your front porch in the morning and going in and reading the hard copy, which is what I still like to do.
Well, and me too.
But it's, there came a point, I'm not exactly sure when this happened, but the beginning of the online aspects.
Well, through history, of course, at one point, newspapers had a monopoly of information, news and information, except for word of mouth, until the advent of radio, and still had the advantage of being visual until the advent of television. And so we lost that, and so we had to kind of reinvent the newspaper every time that happened. And then, of course, the digital revolution has changed everything. At first, newspapers just started putting our news online and even giving it away. But now we've come in 15 years, 20 years probably, and in an increasingly faster pace. It's not only changed how we can deliver the news, and we deliver it still in print if you want it. We have an e-edition. We have an iPad edition, which is really cool. That's what I use when I'm traveling. You know, anywhere in the world, you get on Wi-Fi and you can download what the paper actually still looks like, and turn pages with your finger and make pictures bigger, and there's actually more in there. We have of course, a mobile platform, and then Jacksonville.com, which is the leading news website in town. So you can pretty much get the news digitally any way you want. Digital technology also has helped us enormously in the way we report the news. When I started, my equipment consisted of a notebook and a pencil. if I was smart, 2 pencils, because you never know when you're going to break one or run out of lead. And now our reporters and photographers and others are armed with, of course, smartphones. So reporters take their own photographs, they take their own video. We can crowdsource stories through the website and through our mobile platform so that we get information from the mass audience about some story we're working on. We can update our story minute to minute, and we do.
All right.
So the technology has made delivery of news far faster and more effective and more powerfully than it used to be.
Well, while we continue to talk about this, Matt's got some photos on his laptop. Let's go ahead and start looking at some of them.
Sure.
And we'll just quickly go through some of the photos that run in the Times-Union.
Well, this is a big story. The Roosevelt fire.
Absolutely.
50 years ago. Miss America was in town, and
a really terrible hotel fire.
it was. And there were a lot of heroes that day. Here's Walken Lawton Charles visiting town, thanking his supporters. There's the wonderful artist Gilmore, JU's improbable run to the national championship game.
An iconic moment in Jacksonville history.
It certainly was. I guess that's the fun thing about the paper. We're not perfect, but you can look back through these and really see how life went. There's the Modus building going up.
Yeah.
So photographers have caught some great photos. That's I believe, the Mayflower Hotel going down. So that was a disaster, a fire.
Yeah.
We cover a lot of this kind of stuff, breaking news. There's a very young Tiger Woods, 18 years old, I believe, at the TPC. And there's Nat Glover celebrating.
Yeah.
I believe that's the first season, no tarps, first season exhibition game.
This is
of the
the
Jaguars.
beginning of the NFL era.
Yes, right here. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
This was the terrible murder of Mattie Clifton.
Right.
We cover a lot of terrible news too, like this. These are the fires that went across Florida and went across northeast Florida in the late '90s when the city turned to ashes, smell of ash anyway. These are people preparing their house. That's the opening of the World Golf Village. Of course, the Super Bowl was a big event here for Jacksonville.
Indeed.
This was a great photo. We have wonderful staff photographers. This was a great photo during a hostage standoff in Mayport.
And we may not see it because we're running through these very fast, but a Pulitzer Prize winning photographer.
Yeah, I believe we'll see that in here.
Okay.
There's downtown, I believe during the Super Bowl. There's President Bush speaking at the stadium. That's Super Bowl again. Oh, that's a funeral of a poor girl killed in random fire. Some political commentary.
Oh.
That is also the funeral. And this is just like, life on this street there. There's Mayor Payton celebrating his victory. Tall ships when they came to town. So we cover just about everything.
Nice photo
nice
there.
Photo there. There's the city. You can see changes in the skyline. Here's a series of photos on the Great Fire in 1901. And the reports from that day were amazing to look at. They're talking about the brave Western Union girls at their stand as flames were blowing across the street, from across the street.
We're about out of time. Obviously, you're going to have to come back for part 2 because there's just too much to cover here. I've really enjoyed seeing these photos and talking. I'm an old newspaper man. I still believe it didn't happen until I see it in the newspaper, even though I spent some years in television. Anyway, Frank Denton, Matt Soergel, thank you very much for being with us on the Jacksonville History Show. We'll have you back real soon.
Thanks, I enjoyed it.
And stay with us. We'll be right back with guests from the Ritz Theater and Museum.